Chapter 4. A month later, Vasu stopped his jeep in front of my office and sounded the horn, sitting at the wheel with the engine running. I looked up from a proof of a wedding invitation I was correcting.
The adjournment lawyer was sitting in front of me. His daughter was to be married in 2 weeks, and he was printing 1,000 invitation cards. This was a piece of work I was obliged to deliver in time. I didn't want to be interrupted today.
I shouted back to Vasu, "Anything urgent?" "Yeah," he said. He seemed to have picked up his American style from crime books and films. "I am busy now," I said.
"Come on," he said aggressively. I placed a weight on the proof and went out. "Jump in," he said when I approached him. "I really can't," I said.
"That man is waiting for me." "Don't be silly, jump in." "Where are you going?"
"I'll bring you back in 10 minutes, he said. "Can't you spare for my sake just 10 minutes? I said, "No, I can't spare 10 minutes.
"All right, 5 minutes then." I climbed into the jeep, and he drove off. I found that he was driving on and on.
We had crossed Nalapa's Grove and were actually 10 miles on the trunk road. He drove recklessly. I asked him where he was going. "I thought you might enjoy a visit to Mempi."
What's the meaning of this?" I asked angrily. "So you don't like to be with me?"
"All right. Shall I stop? You may get down and go back."
I knew it would be futile to exhibit my temper. It would only amuse him. I concealed my chagrin and said, "I certainly should enjoy walking back 10 miles, but I wish I had had the time to pick up my shirt buttons at least before leaving."
I had mislaid my buttons at home. My shirt was open at the chest. He cast a look at me.
"No one will mind it in the jungle," he said and rocked with laughter. Now that I was at his mercy, I thought I might as well abandon myself to the situation. I only wished I had not left the adjournment lawyer sitting in my chair.
How long was Lai going to be there, and what was to happen to the marriage of his daughter without invitation cards? I said, assuming the most casual tone possible, it was a matter of an urgent marriage invitation. "How urgent is the marriage?" he asked.
"Coming off in 15 days, and they must have time to post the invitation cards." "A printer has his own responsibility," I said. "If man is willing and the woman is willing, there is marriage."
"What has a printer to do with it? It's none of a printer's business. Why should you worry?"
I gave up all attempts to explain. He was not prepared to pay any attention to my words. He was the Lord of the universe. He had no use for other people's words. "Why should you worry?"
he asked again and again. It was so unreasonable and unseasonable that I didn't think it fit to find an answer for him. I noticed that the speedometer needle was showing a steady 60.
"Mind the road," I said, as I saw villagers walking in a file, stepping off as the jeep grazed their sides. Truck traffic and buses swerved away, the drivers muttering imprecations. Vasu enjoyed their discomfiture and laughed uproariously.
Then he became suddenly serious and said, "More people should die on the roads, if our nation is to develop any road sense at all." A peasant woman was sitting on the roadside with a girl whose hair she was searching for lice. He saw them ahead and set himself to run into them, and swerved away after seeing them tumble over each other in fright.
"Oh, poor creatures," I said. "I hope they aren't hurt." "Oh, no, they won't be hurt. These women are hardy and enjoy all such fun."
Didn't you see how they were laughing? I felt it would be best to leave his words without a comment. Even that seemed to annoy him.
We went up a couple of miles, and he said, "Why are you silent? What are you thinking about? Still worrying about that invitation?" "Yes," I said, to be on the safer side.
"Only fools marry, and they deserve all the trouble they get. I really do not know why people should marry at all. If you like a woman, have her by all means.
You don't really have to own a coffee estate because you like to have a cup of coffee now and then." And he smiled, more and more pleased with his own witty observations. I had never known him to be so wild.
He had seemed to practice a few restraints of tongue when he visited me at my press. But now, as we rode in his jeep on the highway, his behavior was breathtaking. I wondered for a moment whether he might be drunk.
I asked testily, "What do you think of prohibition, which they are talking about nowadays?" "Why?" he asked. I had no answer ready for the question. As I was wondering what to say, he said, Drink is like marriage, as far as I can see.
If people like it, it's their business and nobody else's. I tried to drink whiskey once, but gave it up. It tastes bad, he said.
He sat brooding at the wheel for a moment and said, "Wonder why anyone should want to drink." My last hope that this man might be drunk was now gone. One who could conduct himself in this manner in dead sobriety.
I shuddered to contemplate. I was glad to jump out of the jeep when we arrived at Mempi village. Hiding in the jeep over all those bums, with one leg dangling out, had been painful, and my head reeled slightly with the speed of his driving.
Mempi village, at the foot of the hills, consisted of a single street, which wound along and half a mile away climbed a steep hill and disappeared into the ranges of Mempi. The road was flanked by a few cottages built of bamboo and coconut thatch, a tea shop with bananas in bunches dangling from a nail on the ceiling, which was a rallying point for buses and treks, and a touring open-air cinema plastered over with the picture of a wide-eyed heroine watching the landscape. One saw the jungle studding the sides of the hill.
A small shrine stood at the confluence of the mountain road with the highway, and the goddess presiding was offered coconut and camphor flame by every vehicle going up the mountain road. Vasu pulled up his jeep and asked the man at the tea shop, "What's the news?" The man said, "Good news.
There was a prowler last night, so they say. We saw pug marks on the sand, and sheep were bleating as if they had gone mad. Not where I live.
But I heard Ranga talk of it today." "Did he see anything?" asked Vasu, and he added eagerly, "What did he see?" The tea shop had a customer at this moment, and the man mechanically handed him a bun, drew strong red tea from the sizzling urn, and poured it into a glass tumbler.
I had been starving. I cast longing looks at the brown buns arranged on a shelf, although normally I would not dare to eat anything out of a shop like this. Flies swarmed over sugar and everything else, with nothing washed or covered, and road dust flew up at the motion of every vehicle and settled on all the bread, buns, fruit, sugar, and milk.
The shop had a constant crowd of visitors, buses and trucks climbing to the coffee estates, bullock carts in caravans, pedestrians. Everyone stopped here for refreshment. When I put my finger into my pocket, I did not find a single coin, but only the stub of a pencil with which I'd been correcting the proof of the invitation. I called pathetically, like a child at a fair tugging at the sleeve of his elder, Vasu.
He was busy discussing the pug marks, and his circle was growing. A coconut seller, the village idiot, the village wag, a tailor, and a man carrying a bundle of tobacco on his head. Each was adding his own to the symposium on the visit of the tiger and enlarging on the story. Vasu did not hear me call him.
I had to cry out, "Vasu, lend me some cash, I want to try the tea here." He paused. "Tea?
Why?" I felt silly with my shirt open at the chest and the dhoti around my waist. "I'm hungry. I had no time for breakfast this morning."
He looked at me for a minute and resumed his discussion about the pug marks. I felt slighted. Hunger had given an edge to my temper.
I felt indignant that I should have been dragged out so unceremoniously and treated in this manner. I called out, "Have you or have you not any loose coin on you? I'll return it to you as soon as I am back home."
"So you think we are going back home, eh?" he said irresponsibly. I was struck with a sudden fear that this man was perhaps abducting me and was going to demand a ransom for releasing me from some tiger cave. What would my wife and little son do if they were suddenly asked to produce 50,000 rupees to get me released?
She might have to sell the house and all her jewelry. I had not yet paid the final installment on that gold necklace of hers that she fancied only because someone she knew had a similar one. Good girl. This had been her most stubborn demand in all the years of our wedded life, and how could I have denied her?
Luckily, I had printed the cooperative bank annual report and paid off half the price of the necklace with those earnings. But that necklace cost in all only 700 rupees. How would she make up 50,000? We might have to sell off the treadle. It was rickety and might fetch just 13,000. And then what should I do after my release, without RNY printing machinery?
What was to happen to Sastri? He'd be unemployed, or would he go over to operate the Heidelberg? If my wife appealed to him, would he have the sense to go to the police and lead them to the tiger cave guarded over by this frightful man with the dark halo over his head?
Suppose the tiger returned to the cave and found him while he mounted guard over me, would the beast have the guts to devour him first and then, retching at the sight of any further food, leave me alone? All this flashed through my mind in an instant, and it made me swallow my temper and smile ingratiatingly at Vasu, which had a better effect than any challenge. He relented enough to say, "You see, when I'm out on business, I rarely think of food."
Because you'll not hesitate to make a meal of any fool who has the ill luck to go with you, I remarked mentally. Then he suddenly left me, got into his jeep, said, "Come on," to someone in the group, and was off. I felt slightly relieved at his exit, but cried like a lost child, when he waved to me, saying, "Stay here, I'll be back," and his jeep raced up the mountain road and disappeared around a bend. I looked down at my chest, still unbuttoned. I felt ridiculous, standing where I was. This was no doubt a very beautiful place, the hills and the curving village road, and the highway vanishing into the hills, but I'd hardly have chosen to be dragged out and stranded here. The hills looked blue, no doubt, and the ranges beyond were shimmering, but that could hardly serve as an excuse for anyone to take liberties with my person in this manner.
I sat down on a wooden plank stretched over 2 empty tins, which served for a bench at the tea shop. "Is there a bus for Malgudi from here?" I asked the tea shop man.
"Yes, at 2 o'clock, coming from Top Slip. It would be a nice idea to catch it and get back to town, but how was one to pay for the ticket?" I didn't have even a button to my shirt. I cursed myself for entertaining and encouraging Vasu.
But I also felt relieved that he had gone away without a word about the ransom. I explained my situation to the tea shop man. He was very happy when he heard that I was a printer and eagerly said, "Ah, I'm so happy, sir, to know you.
Can you print some notices for me, sir?" "With pleasure," I said, and added, "I'm here to serve the public. I can print anything you may want, and if you prefer to have your work done on a German machine, I can arrange that too. My neighbor has an original Heidelberg, and we are like brothers."
The man explained, "I have no time to leave this place and attend to any other business in the town, and so I have long been worrying how to get some printing work done." "Oh, you don't have to worry as long as I'm here. Your printing will be delivered to you at your door. That's how I serve my customers. I print for a wide clientele and deliver the goods by bus or train, whichever goes earlier."
"Ah, that's precisely how I would like to be served," he said. And then he launched on his autobiography. He was a self-made man.
Having left his home in Tirunelveli when Lai was 12 years of age, he had come to Mempi in search of work. He knew no one, and he drifted on to the tea plantations on the hills and worked as an estate laborer, picking tea leaves, loading trucks, and in general acting as a handyman. In the August of 1947, when India became independent, the estate, which had been owned by an English company, changed hands, and he came downhill to look for a new job.
He established a small shop, selling betel nuts, peppermints, tobacco, and so on, and expanded it into a tea shop. Business prospered as new dam construction was started somewhere in a valley 10 miles out, and engineers, ministers, journalists, builders, and laborers moved up and down in jeeps, trucks, and station wagons. The place buzzed with activity night and day. His tea shop grew to its present stature.
He built a house, and another house, very near the shop in a back street. "I can go home in 5 minutes for a nap or to snatch some food," he boasted. And then he took an interest in the shrine at the confluence of the mountain and plains.
Hundreds of vehicles go up to those summits, and to this day we have never heard of an accident, although some of those roads are narrow and twisting, and if you are careless you'll dive over the ridge. But there has not been a single accident. You know why? He pointed at the little turret of the shrine showing above the roadside trees.
"Because the goddess protects us. I rebuilt the temple with my own funds. I have regular pujas performed there."
You know, we have also a temple elephant. It came years ago of its own accord from the hills, strayed along with a herd of cattle returning from the hills after grazing. It was then about 6 months old and was no bigger than a young buffalo. We adopted it for the temple.
His name is Kumar, and children and elders alike adore him and feed him with coconut and sugar cane and rice all day. After all this rambling talk, he came to the point. He was about to celebrate the consecration of the temple on a grand scale, carrying the goddess in a procession with pipe, music, and everything, and led by the elephant. He
wanted me to print 1,000 notices so that a big crowd might turn up on that day. I readily agreed to do it for him, and asked, "When do you want it?" He was flabbergasted.
I don't know. We shall have to discuss it at a meeting of the temple committee. I was relieved to note that it was only a vague proposal still and said, write to me as soon as your plans are ready and I will do my best for you.
I will print anything you want. By the way, why don't you let me taste your tea, and a couple of those buns? Who is your baker in the town?
He has given them such a tint. He concocted a special brew of tea for me and handed me a couple of brown buns on a piece of old newspaper. I felt refreshed and could view my circumstances with less despair now.
At the back of my mind was a worry as to whether the adjournment lawyer might still be sitting waiting for my return. Return home? There was no such prospect.
I should have been wiser if I had written my will before venturing out with Vasu. I'll pay your bill next time when I come to you, I said, maybe with the printed notices. You see, I had to come away suddenly and didn't know I'd come so far.
And then I made another request. Do you know these bus people? What sort are they?
Every bus must stop here for tea, he said boastfully. I knew it'd be so, I said. Can you do me a favor?
Could you ask one of these conductors to take me back to town and collect the fare at the other end? The bus has to pass in front of my press, and I could just dash in. Why do you want to go away? Won't you wait for Vasu?
I felt desperate. Was this man in league with Vasu? Probably they had plans to carry me to the cave at night. All ransom-demanding gangsters operated only at night.
They were perhaps saving me up for their nocturnal activities. I said, I must get back to the press today. The lawyer will be waiting for me, you know. Wedding invitation.
You know how important it is. But Vasu, he may ask why I didn't keep you here. I know him, and he is sometimes strict, as you may know.
Oh, I said casually. He is a good fellow, though his speech is blunt sometimes. We are very close, you know, and he knows all about this marriage invitation.
He'll understand, and he is a good friend of mine. The trouble is I came away without picking up my buttons or cash. I laughed, trying to import into the whole situation a touch of humor.
I wonder when Vasu will be back. Oh, that nobody can say. When he hears about a tiger, he forgets everything else.
Now he'll be right in the jungle following the pug marks. Fearless man, I cried in order to please the tea seller. What is your name? Muthu, he said.
I have 4 children, and a daughter to marry. Oh. So you will understand more than anyone else how anxious that lawyer will be. Which lawyer? He asked.
Our adjournment lawyer, whom I left sitting in my office. 5. I'm sure you will help me to find a good bridegroom for my daughter. He lowered his voice to say, my wife is scheming to marry her off to her own brother's son. But I have other ideas.
I want the girl to marry a boy who is educated. She must marry someone who is at least a BA, I said. He was so pleased with this that he gave me another bun and another glass of tea.
This is my treat. You don't have to pay for this cup of tea, he said. Presently his customers began to arrive, mostly coolies carrying pickaxes, crowbars, and spades on their way to that mysterious project beyond the hills.
Caravans of bullock carts carrying firewood and timber stopped by. Loudspeaker music blared forth from the tent cinema, where they were testing their sound again and again, part of a horribly mutilated Elvis Presley tune, Indianized by the film producer. I sat there and no one noticed me. Their arms reached right over my head for the glasses of tea. Sometimes brown tea trickled over the side of a tumbler and fell on my clothes.
I did not mind it. At other times I'd have gone into a rage at any man that dared to spill tea over my clothes. Today I had resigned myself to anything, as long as I could hope for a bus ride back to town on credit and goodwill. I glanced at the brown face of a very old timepiece kept on a wooden shelf inside the tea shop.
It was so brown that I could hardly make out the numerals on it. Still an hour more before the bus would arrive, and 2 hours since Vasu had gone. I only hoped that he would not return before the bus arrived.
I prayed he would not. I reassured myself again by asking, over the babble of the tea shop, if Muthu could tell when Vasu would be back, and he gave me the same reply as before. This was the only silver lining in the cloud that enshrouded my horizon that day.
Even then my heart palpitated with apprehension lest Vasu should suddenly appear at the tea shop and carry out his nefarious program for the evening. He could pick me up between his thumb and first finger and put me down where he pleased. Considering his enormous strength, it was surprising that he did not do more damage to his surroundings.
I sat in a trembling suspense as men came and went, buying tobacco, betel leaves, and cigarettes and tea and buns. I could hardly get a word with Muthu. I sat brooding over what I'd have to face from Sastri or my wife when I got back.
Got back. The very word sounded remote and improbable. The town, the fountain, and my home in Kabir Street seemed a faraway dream which I had deserted years ago.
The crowd at the tea shop was gone in a while. I sat on the bench and fell into a drowse. The hill and fields and the blindingly blue sky were lovely to watch, no doubt, but I could not go on watching their beauty forever.
I was not a poet. If my monosyllabic friend were here, perhaps he would have enjoyed sitting there and watching forever, but I was a businessman, a busy printer, and so forth. I felt weak. I might eat all the buns in the world, but without a handful of rice and the sauce my wife made, I could never feel convinced that I had taken nourishment.
The air far off trembled with the vibration of a motor. Muthu declared, "The bus should be here in 10 minutes. Amazing man, with ears so well attuned."
I said so. I wanted to do and say everything to please this man, whom at normal times I'd have passed as just another man selling tea in unwashed glass tumblers. The bus arrived, on its face a large imposing signboard which called it Makmpi Bus Transport Corporation, although the bus itself was an old one picked off a war surplus dump, rigged up with canvas and painted yellow and red.
It was impossible to guess how many were seated in the bus until it stopped at the tea shop and passengers wriggled and jumped out as if for an invasion. They swarmed around the tea shop, outnumbering the flies there. The conductor, a very telaye man in a peaked cap and khaki shirt over half shorts, emerged with a cash bag across his shoulder, and the driver jumped out of his scat.
Men, women, and children clamored for attention at the tea shop. The driver and the conductor exchanged a few words, looked at the cash bag, took out some coins for themselves. And the conductor addressed the gathering in general. "I am not stopping more than 5 minutes.
If anyone is left behind, he will be left behind, that's all. I warn you all, don't blame me later," and he looked around like a headmaster watching his pupils and passed into the tea shop. He was given a seat of honor beside the owner at the tea shop.
He called for a glass of tea and buns. He lit a cigarette. After he was well settled, I went up to show myself to Muthu, who I feared might forget me in the midst of his booming business, a fear which was well founded, for as soon as he saw me, he said, "Ah, I'd forgotten about our printing master."
He told the conductor, "Brother, give him a seat for the town, he will pay at the other end." The brother took time to grasp the meaning of the proposition. He looked at me with sour suspicions.
Why should he not pay now? Because he has left all his cash in the town. Then why did he come here? You know how many tell me that each day?
He moistened his upper lip with his tongue as smoke emerged from his nostrils. Another monster in league with Vasu, I thought, and felt desperate. He demonstrated with his hands the act of wringing a neck.
I'd like to do this to anyone who comes up with such a proposal. If our inspector checks midway, it'll end my career, and then I and my family will have to take a begging bowl and go from door to door. This man had a far-fetched imagination.
Having always lived within the shelter of my press, I had probably grown up in complete ignorance of human nature, which seemed to be vicious, vile, vindictive, and needlessly unfriendly everywhere. I went up to him with chest drawn up and said haughtily, "I'll guarantee that you will not have to carry a begging bowl. Today I am stuck here, but generally I am not a passenger for any bus, as I have a car, if not mine, my friend's, WTHICH is as good as mine."
What car do you use? Well, I said, reflecting, a Morris, of course, mentioning the first make that came to my head. Model? He asked, pursuing the subject.
51, I think. 4-door? Yes. Oh, you are lucky. It's worth its weight in gold, this particular model.
I know more than one man who is searching for this model desperately. Do you think you would care to quote a price for it? I shook my head.
Oh, dozens of persons ask me that every day, but I want to keep it till it falls to bits, you know. I don't want to sell. Now he developed a wholesome respect for me as a member of the automobile fraternity.
He was prepared to overlook my unbuttoned shirt and disheveled appearance and ticketless travel. I wished I had acquired some more jargon of the auto world in order to impress him further. But I had to manage as best I could with whatever rang in my memory as a result of printing for Ramu of Ramu's service station,
who sometimes dropped in to talk of the state of the nation in the motoring world. The bus conductor said, "Anytime you want to dispose of your Morris, you must tell me." He turned to Muthu and confided, "Sooner or later I want to give up this endless ticket punching and drive a baby taxi.
I know a man who earns a net income of 50 rupees a day with just one baby vehicle. I have saved enough to buy a car now." Muthu nudged him in the midriff and muttered, "Don't I know?"
darkly, at which both of them simpered. I knew at once they meant that the conductor made money by pocketing a lot of cash collected from the passengers. I said, to add to the mood of the hour, one has to make money while one can.
Otherwise, when one is old or down and out, who would give a paisa? When he started out, nearly half an hour later, I walked along royally with the conductor and took my scat in the bus. I had taken leave of Muthu briefly, but in touching terms, he assured me that he would write to me for any help he might need.
I sat beside the driver. The conductor leaned over my shoulder from behind to say, "You will have to move and make space at the next stop, the circle is expected." The word, circle, in these circumstances indicated the inspector of police for the circle, whose seat at the front was always reserved.
If another passenger occupied it, it was a matter of social courtesy to vacate it or at least move up closer to the driver and leave enough space at the end of the seat for the circle. The historic variation of this pattern occurred long, long ago, when a planter returning to his estate created a lot of unpleasantness by refusing to make way for the circle, with the result that the circle was obliged to travel in one of the ordinary seats inside the bus, with the rabble, and at the next stop he impounded the whole bus with the passengers for overcrowding.
The bus travelled for an hour. I felt happy that I'd slipped away from Vasu after all. I cast a look behind once or twice to see if his jeep was following us.
Coming back from his tracking of Tiger, he might want to embark on the bigger expedition of tracking a printer escaped from the tea shop. The bus stopped under a tree on the roadway, the conductor warning, "We are not stopping for more than a minute. If anyone is impatient to get out, let him get out forever."
Don't blame me afterwards. In spite of this threat, a few of the passengers wriggled out and disappeared behind the bushes on the roadside. A constable in uniform was seen coming across the maize field, sweating in the sun and bearing under his arm a vast load of papers and files.
He gesticulated from a distance to catch the eye of the driver. He arrived and placed the files on the seat next to me. I moved over to the inner side of the seat close to the driver and cleared a space for the circle.
I couldn't, after all, be choosy, being there on sufferance. The constable said to the driver, "The circle is coming, you'll have to wait." "How long?" asked the conductor.
The constable clung to the rail, rested his feet on the step, pushed his turban back on his head, and disdained to answer the question. Instead he asked, "Give me a BCEDL," and held out his hand for it. The driver produced matches and a Bekdi from his pocket.
The constable smoked. The acrid smell of BCCDI leaf and tobacco overpowered the smell of petrol. The constable's face shone with perspiration. He said, "I feared I might lose the bus, the circle would have chopped off my head."
A couple of children started crying. A woman sang a soft but tuneless lullaby. Someone was ravening noisily. Someone was swearing. A couple of peasants were discussing a litigation. Someone asked wearily, "Are we going to go on at all?" And someone else joked about this. I looked back furtively for Vasu's jeep coming in pursuit. I grew tired of the policeman's face, and the road ahead, and everything.
I was beginning to feel hungry, all the buns having been assimilated into the system long ago. The whole of the passenger crowd subsided into an apathetic, dull waiting, and finally the circle turned up, a swarthy man in khaki uniform. He suddenly appeared beside the bus on a bicycle. As soon as he jumped off, the constable held the handle of the machine, and the conductor heaved it up to the rooftop.
The circle climbed into his seat and just said, "Start." The driver squeezed the bulb of the rubber horn, and its short raucous bark resounded along the highway, past the hill, and brought running a dozen passengers who had strayed away from the suffocating bus into the surrounding country. For a brief while there was the disorder of people trying to clamber back to their original seats.
One heard grumblings, I was sitting here, and rejection of such claims, until the conductor said, keep quiet, everyone, in deference to the presence of the circle. The circle, however, sat stiffly looking ahead. It was evident that Lai did not want to embarrass the conductor by noticing the overcrowding. I was overwhelmed by the proximity of this eminent personage, who smelt of the sun, sweat, and leather belt.
I hoped he'd not take me for an ex-convict and order me out. He had a nice downward-directed short moustache. He wore dark glasses, and his nose was hooked and sharp. His Adam's apple also jutted out.
The driver drove with great caution. This man, who had been swerving away from collisions for over an hour, a pattern of driving to which Vasu had already accustomed me, never drove now at over 20 miles, applied the brake when a piece of paper drifted across, and gently chided any villager who walked in the middle of the road. At this rate, I felt that he'd reach the town only at midnight. His speed depended on where the circle was getting out.
I felt it imperative to know at once his destination. You are going to the town, I suppose? I said to the circle.
Where was the harm in asking him that? There was no law against it. He turned his sunglasses at me and said, I'll be getting off at Talapur.
Is that where you stay? I asked. No. I'm going there for an investigation, he said, and I shuddered at the thought of the poor man who was going to be investigated by him.
He talked to me about the crime in his area. We've a lot of cattle lifting cases in these parts, but the trouble is identification. When the property is traced, they mutilate the animals, and then what happens is the case is dismissed and all the trouble one takes to frame a charge sheet is simply wasted. We have a few murders too, and a certain amount of prohibition offences around the dry belt areas.
I found that he was a friendly sort of man, in spite of all his grim looks. This is a difficult circle, he said finally. Offenders often disappear into those jungles on Mernpi, and one has to camp for days on end sometimes in those forests.
At the Talapur bus stand, which was under a tree, with a replica of Muthu's tea stall, a constable was on hand to receive the circle and haul down his bicycle from the bus roof. He got on his cycle and pedalled away. Talapur was a slightly larger town than Mempi and was viewed as an important junction on the road.
It had more shops lining the street. The bus conductor uttered the usual warning to the passengers and vanished into the tea shop. Most of the passengers followed suit, and some dispersed into various corners of the city.
I sat in the bus, nursing my hunger in silence, having no credit in this town. When the bus started again, every breath of it demonstrated that the circle was no longer there to impede its freedom. It was driven recklessly and brought to a dead stop every 10 minutes to pick up a wayside passenger.
The conductor never said no to anyone. As he explained to me, these poor fellows will get stranded on the highway if we are not considerate. After all, they are also human creatures. He was a compassionate conductor who filled his pockets with the wayside fare, never issuing a ticket.
At this rate he could buy a Rolls-Royce and not a Morris Minor, I thought. The bus left the highway and darted across devious side tracks through cornfields in search of passengers. It would draw up at a most unexpected spot, and the driver, sounding the horn, would cry, come on, Malgudi, last bus for the town.
The bus penetrated into the remotest hamlet to ferret out a possible visitor to the town, and all the passengers had to go where the bus went and sit there patiently watching the antics of the driver and the conductor, who seemed to have fixed a target of income for the day and were determined to reach it. That was how a 3-hour jeep ride in the morning was stretched out to 8 on the return journey, and it was 11 at night when the bus came to a halt at the public square beyond the market in Malgudi. At 8 o'clock next morning I sat correcting the proof of the adjournment lawyer's invitation.
Sastri came in half an hour after I had opened the door of the press. He stood transfixed at the sight of me and said, we all waited till 9 last night. I've always told you that you should lock up the door at your usual time, whether I am in or out, I said grandly, and added, I sometimes get so much else to do.
But that lawyer would not move. He kept saying you promised to be back in 5 minutes, in 5 minutes. And then the fruit juice labels.
He was very bitter and said, oh, stop that, Sastri, I said impatiently. I did not like the aggrieved tone he was adopting. I had had enough of nagging from my wife all night, after she had to get up from sleep and feed me at midnight.
If I disappeared abruptly, it was my own business. Why should I be expected to give an explanation to so many? Stop that, Sastri.
If the fruit juice man wants to print his labels elsewhere, let him clear out, that's all. I can't be dancing attendance on all and sundry, that's all. If he can find any other printer to bring out his magenta shade in the whole of South India.
Mr. Sastry did not wait for me to finish my sentence but passed in, as it seemed to me, haughtily. I sat correcting the proof. The corrections were where I had left them the previous day. Mr.
Requests the pleasure of your company. Wrong fonts, and the bridegroom's name was misspelled. Company came out as Kambahi.
I never cease to marvel at the extraordinary devils that dance their way into the first proof. The sight of Kambahi provoked me to hysterical laughter. I was feeling light-headed.
Would not have to beg at a tea shop and starve or go about without a button to my shirt. I had a feeling of being in an extraordinarily fortunate, secure position, enough to be able to say, "Fie," to Sastry or anyone. Life on Market Road went on normally.
It was good to watch again the jutkas and cycles going round the fountain and the idlers of our town sitting on its parapet and spitting into it. It produced a great feeling of security and stability in me. It could last only for a few minutes.
The adjournment lawyer, looking unshaven as ever, draping his shoulders in a spotted khadi shawl, and clad in a dhoti above his knees, with an umbrella dangling from his arm, stepped in, his face set in a frown. "Do you think," he began? One look at him and I knew what he was going to say.
"Won't you come in and take a seat first?" "Why should I?" he asked. "I'm not here to waste my time."
I still motioned him to a chair, but he seemed to be afraid that, once he sat there, I'd abandon him and disappear again for the day. He briefly said, "I'm printing my invitation elsewhere, so don't trouble yourself." "Oh, no trouble whatever. This is a free country. You are a free man. Our constitution gives us fundamental rights. How can I compel you or anyone to do what you may not want to do?"
I knew he was lying. If he had wasted his time till 9 last evening and was back so soon, when did he find the time to seek a printer? Anyway, it was not my business. This was a free country. Fundamental rights. Every citizen was free to print his daughter's marriage card where he pleased. But if he had his wits about him, he'd watch out where he got the best results. "Sastry,"
I called aggressively. "Bring this gentleman's original draft. Lawyer so-and-so's daughter's wedding."
Sastry from his invisible world responded with his voice but made no effort to come up with the original. It gave everyone time to cool, signalized by the lawyer's edging a step nearer the chair. "Won't you take your seat, please?"
"Mr. Sastry should be with us in a minute." He sat down. He remained in a state of hostile silence.
I asked, "I suppose all your other arrangements are ready?" He shook his head and said, "Truly have our elders said." He quoted a proverb which said that building a house and conducting a marriage were the two Herculean tasks that faced a man.
I added a further sentiment, that a man who marries off his daughter need perform no other meritorious acts in life as he is gifting away the most precious treasure, a daughter, which moved the lawyer so deeply that the tears came to his eyes. He said, blowing his nose, "Sushila is the gentlest of my children. I hope she will have no trouble from her mother-in-law."
He sighed deeply at this thought. I said consolingly, "Mother-in-law. Down with them," says the modern girl, college-educated and modern-minded.
"I've given her the best possible education," he said morosely. "What more could I do? I pay her music master 15 rupees a month, her school fees amount to 15 rupees, and I pay 10 rupees for her school bus." And you have to manage all this, I thought, by securing endless adjournments, but I said aloud, "Yes, life today is most expensive." After all this agreeable tête-à-tête, I cried suddenly, "Sastry, here is the gentleman waiting to take away his invitation copy. After all, we must give him time to print elsewhere," at which the lawyer behaved like one stung. Oh no, he cried, "even if it means stopping the marriage, I will not go for my printing anywhere else." I said, "I'm here to help humanity in my own humble way. I will never say no to anyone. Don't hesitate to command me for whatever you may want me to do." He took my offer promptly and said, 1,000 cards, or do you think we could do with less? Late that evening, Vasu's jeep drew up before my press. It was past 8 and the traffic in the street was thin. Vasu looked at me from his driving seat. His hair was dust-covered and stood up more like a halo than ever. He beckoned to me from his seat.
I was overworking today in order to finish the lawyer's invitations, and I had even undertaken to address and distribute them if he ordered me to. He had worked up so much confidence about me that he did not feel the need to sit up with me, and had gone home. I shouted back to Vasu, "Why don't you come in?"
I was now on my own ground, and I had no fear of anyone. He said, "Hey, come on. I want you to see what I have here."
I went out, making up my mind not to step onto the jeep, whatever might happen. I'd stand at a distance to see whatever it was that he was going to show me. There was dust and grime on his face, but also a triumphant smile exposing his teeth. His eyes had widened, showing the whites.
I edged cautiously to the jeep. I only hoped that he would not thrust his arm out, grab me, and drive off. He took a flashlight and threw the beam on the back seat, where lay the enormous head of a tiger.
"Where did you manage it?" I asked, there being no other way of talking to a man who had brought in the head of a tiger. A couple of curious passers-by slowed their pace.
Vasu shouted to them, "Get away and mind your business." He started his car to take it through the side gate and park it in the yard. I went back to my seat and continued my work.
I could hear his steps go up the wooden stairs. When the breeze blew in from his direction, there was already a stench of flesh. It might have been my imagination. The curtain parted. He came in and took a seat.
He lit a cigarette and asked, "Do you know what he measures?" 10.5 tip to tip, head is almost 18 inches wide. I got him finally in the block. You see, they will have a surprise when they next check the tiger population in their block.
He then narrated how he got information from various persons, and followed the footmarks of the tiger from place to place. He had to wander nearly 6 miles within the jungle, and finally got it at a water hole, at about 2 in the night. He showed me the bleeding scratches on his feet from having to push his way through thicket. At any moment it might have sprung on him from some unsuspected quarter.
I was prepared to knock him down with my hands and ram the butt of my rifle between his jaws if it came to that, he said. It was evident that he was not going to wait for others to pay him compliments. He showered handfuls of them on himself.
"What about permit? You didn't have it?" Anyway, the tiger didn't mind the informality.
And he laughed aloud at his own humor. "That swine double-crossed me. Probably because you didn't print golden thoughts for him."
He never let slip an occasion to blame me or accuse me. I gave no reply. I became curious to see his animal.
He took me to his room. Since he had occupied it, this was my first visit there. He had his bed draped over with a mosquito net, a table in a corner, heaped over with clothes and letters, and a trunk with its lid open with all his clothes thrown about.
He had tied a string across the room and had more clothes on it. On the little terrace he had put out some skins to dry. There was a tub at a corner in which the skin of the tiger was soaking. Skins of smaller animals lay scattered here and there, jungle squirrels, and feathered birds lay heaped up in corners.
A lot of wooden planks and molds and all kinds of oddments were about. Ever since I had given him the attic, I had left him fairly alone, not wanting to seem an intrusive host. And all the while he had been surrounding himself with carcasses.
The room smelled of decaying flesh and raw hide. This man had evidently been very active with his gun, which now rested on his bed. I'm a man of business, and I cannot afford to waste my time.
Each day that I spend without doing my work is a day completely wasted. There was a resinous odor in the air which made me retch. I couldn't imagine any human being living in this atmosphere.
Sastri had come now and then in the past weeks to complain of a rotting smell somewhere. We had searched our garbage cans and odd corners of the press to see if the paste WTC were using had gone bad. Once I had to speak severely to our binder. I called him names for possibly using some nasty slaughterhouse material in binding.
He was apologetic, although he had used no such material. KVCN, after his promise to improve his material, the smell persisted. It was pervasive and insistent, and Sastri found it impossible to stand at the typeboard and compose.
Then WRE thought a rat might be dead somewhere and turned up every nook and corner of the press, and then we blamed the health department. Next time that fellow Coney's around for votes, I'll make him stand at the typeboard and perform inhaling exercises, I said bitterly. Sometimes my neighbor of the Heidelberg came to ask if I noticed any smell around.
I said emphatically that I did and asked him his views on the municipal administration, little thinking that it emanated from my own building, the reservoir, the fountainhead of all the stink being the attic over my own machine. There was an iron chair on which I sat down because the whole problem loomed before me enormously. If this man continued to stay here, I had really no idea how long he proposed to honor me with his presence.
What was to happen to me and to my neighborhood? Vasu was stirring the broth in the tub with a long pole, at which the stench increased. I held my nostrils with my fingers, and he ordered, "Take off your fingers."
Be a man. When I hesitated, he came up and wrenched my fingers apart. You are imagining things, he said.
What do you think that tub contains? Tiger blood? Ha!
Ha! Pure alum solution. And he led me into the higher realms of carcass treatment.
He said, actually the whole process of our work is much more hygienic and cleaner than paring the skin of vegetables in your kitchen. I shuddered at the comparison. After all, one takes a lot of care to bleed the animal, and after all, only the skin is brought in.
In order to make sure that there is no defect, I attend to everything myself. The paws and the head are particularly important. He lifted the paw of the dead tiger and held it up.
If there is the slightest flaw in incision, you will never be able to bring the ends together. This is what Suleiman taught me. He was an artist, as good as a sculptor or a surgeon, so delicate and precise. I killed the tiger last night.
What do you think I was doing till tonight? Hiding yourself and the carcass from the eyes of forest guards, I thought. Bleeding, skinning, and cleaning it so that sentimentalists may not complain. To make sure further, we pickle, the skin in tons of salt immediately after flaying.
So you will understand it is all done under the most hygienic conditions. He swept his hand around. I do everything myself, not because I care for anyone's comments, but, bits of flesh still there, I said, pointing at the new tiger skin.
What if? Don't you have flesh under your own skin? Do you think you have velvet under your skin?
This was his idea of humor, and I had no way of matching it. I looked around. On his workbench in a corner stood a stuffed crow, a golden eagle, and a cat.
I could recognize the cat as the one that used to prowl in my press hunting for mice. Why did you shoot that cat? That was mine.
I cried, shuddering. I fancied I could still hear its soft mew as it brushed its back against my legs at the treadle. I didn't know, he said.
I only wanted it for a study, after all, the same family as the tiger. I am trying to make a full mold of the tiger. There are some problems of anatomy peculiar to the Felis family in this area, and I needed a miniature for study and research.
Without continuous application one cannot prosper in my line, he said. What did that crow do to you? I asked.
It's to serve as a warning to other crows to let Vasu's skins alone and not to peck at them when they are put out to dry. And that golden eagle? It was wheeling right over that tile 4 days ago. It's only 5 days old. Do you notice any smell? He asked victoriously. He had such a look of satisfaction and victory that I felt like pricking it a little.
Yes, of course, there is a smell. Oh, come on, don't be a fussy prude. Don't imagine that you are endowed with more sensitive nostrils than others. Don't make yourself so superior to the rest of us.
These are days of democracy, remember, and I was appalled at his notion of democracy, that there should be a common sharing and acceptance of bad odor. What did that poor eagle do to you? I asked.
I could not bear to see the still, glazed look of that poor bird. See it stare. I cried.
Aha, he cried. He picked it up, brought it closer to me. So you think it's looking at you with its eyes?
Its dilated black pupils set in a wide circle seemed to accuse us. He was convulsed with laughter and said, his voice splitting with mirth, so you are taken in. You poor fool.
Those eyes are given by me, not by God. Now you will understand why I call my work an art. He opened a wooden chest and brought out a cardboard carton.
See these. He scooped out of it a handful of eyes, big round ones, small ones, red ones in a black circle. The ferocious, striking, killing glare of a tiger, the surprise and superciliousness of an owl, the large black-filled softness of a deer, every category of look was there. He said, all these are from Germany.
We used to get them before the war. Now, you cannot get them for love or money. Just lens.
Sometimes I paint an extra shade on its back for effect. The first thing one does after killing an animal is to take out its eyes, for that's the first thing to rot, and then one gives it new eyes like an optician. I hope you now appreciate at least what an amount of labor goes into the making of these things.
We have constantly to be rivaling nature at her own game. Posture, look, and the total personality, everything has to be created. This man had set himself as a rival to nature and was carrying on a relentless fight all his hours.
You have no doubt excelled in giving it the looks, but poor thing, it's death, especially this one. Don't you see that it is a Garuda? What if? Don't you know that's sacred?
That it's the carrier of God Vishnu? I want to try and make Vishnu use his feet now and then. 5 feet. You may be indifferent, but haven't you seen men and women stopping in the road to look up and salute this bird when it circles in the sky? I wanted to sound deliberately archaic and poetic.
He ruminated for a second and added, I think here is a good business proposition. I can supply them stuffed eagles at about 50 rupees each. Everyone can keep a sacred Garuda in the piya and I'll guarantee that it won't fly off, thus they may save their eyes from glare.
I want to be of service to our religious folk in my own way. I shivered slightly at the thought of this man and his mental working. Nothing seemed to touch him.
No creature was safe if it had the misfortune to catch his eye. I had made a mistake in entertaining him. I should send him out at the earliest possible moment.
His presence defiled my precincts. My mind seethed with ideas as to how to throw him out. But he noticed nothing.
He settled himself down on the easy chair, stretched his legs, and prepared for a nice long chat. This is all a minor job. I really don't care for it.
My real work you will see only when you see that tiger made up. You see it now only as a beast with a head and a lot of loose skin soaking in alum. But I'll show you what I can do with it.